The drill sergeant slammed her into the dirt, expecting submission, but instead witnessed the most humiliating reversal in military training history when she revealed her true capabilities. The rain hammered Camp Morrison like artillery fire, turning the parade ground into a quagmire of mud and misery. Sergeant First Class Marcus Kane stood 6 feet 4 inches of pure malice, his voice cutting through the storm as he screamed at the latest batch of recruits huddled in formation. 23 hopefuls had started the day. By evening, half would be gone, broken by his methods. Lieutenant Sarah Chun stood apart from the group, her small frame lost in oversized fatigues that hung like wet canvas. At 5'2" and barely 100 pounds, she looked more like a lost college student than someone attempting the most grueling military training program in the country. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, rain streaming down a face that appeared far too young for this environment. Kane prowled the formation like a predator selecting prey. His eyes locked onto Chun, and a cruel smile spread across his weathered features. The other recruits shifted nervously, sensing what was coming. They had all witnessed Kane break stronger candidates than this slip of a girl. Well, Kane bellowed, his voice carrying despite the downpour. "What do we have here, princess? You lose your way to ballet class." The other drill instructors chuckled, feeding off their leader's energy. Chun remained perfectly still, eyes forward, saying nothing. Kane stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "I asked you a question, recruit. When I speak, you answer." Still nothing. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Kane's face darkened with rage at the perceived disrespect. "You think you're special, Chun?" Kane's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You think because Daddy pulled some strings to get you here, you don't have to follow my rules?" The accusation hung in the air, completely false but designed to humiliate. Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign she had heard him. Without warning, Kane grabbed Chun by the collar and hurled her sideways into the deepest mud puddle on the field. She hit the ground hard, face first, the impact driving the breath from her lungs. Muddy water splashed across the other recruits, who flinched but dared not move. Chun lay motionless in the mud for several seconds, her face submerged in the murky water. Kane stood over her, hands on his hips, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. He had used this technique hundreds of times. Physical humiliation followed by psychological pressure until the weak ones cracked and quit. It was his specialty, his art form. "Get up," Kane barked. "Or are you going to lie there like the pathetic excuse for a soldier you are?" Chun pushed herself up slowly, muddy water streaming from her face and hair. Her uniform was completely soaked, clinging to her small frame. She stood at attention, eyes forward, saying nothing. Kane circled her like a shark sensing blood. The other recruits watched in horrified fascination. Private Williams, a linebacker's eyes recruit from Alabama, shifted uncomfortably. Even Corporal Torres, the assistant instructor known for his harsh methods, looked slightly disturbed by Kane's intensity. "You know what your problem is, Chun?" Kane continued his verbal assault. "You think this is some kind of game. You think because you scored high on some tests, you belong here with real soldiers." The rain continued to pour, but Kane seemed energized by the miserable conditions. He fed off the discomfort of others. Chun remained perfectly still, water dripping from her chin. Her breathing was controlled, measured. Something about her composure irritated Kane even more than tears would have. He wanted a reaction, needed to see her break. "Maybe you need a reminder about the chain of command," Kane snarled. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups in the mud. Now." Chun immediately dropped into position, her hands disappearing into the thick muck. The other recruits winced, knowing how impossible the task would be in these conditions. She began the push-ups without hesitation. Her form was perfect despite the unstable surface. "Down, up, down, up." Kane counted loudly, adding his own commentary. 1. Pathetic. 2. Embarrassing. 3. Quit wasting our time. But Chun continued, her movements steady and controlled. At 25, Kane stepped on her back, adding his full weight. Recruit Johnson gasped audibly. This was beyond normal training. This was abuse. But Chen didn't falter. She completed the remaining 25 push-ups with Kane standing on her arms never wavering despite the additional burden. Kane stepped off Chen's back, his boots squelching in the mud. He expected to see her collapsed, gasping for breath, finally broken by the impossible task. Instead, she smoothly transitioned back to the attention position, mud coating her uniform like camouflage paint. Her breathing remained controlled, steady. The other recruits stared in disbelief. Private Martinez whispered to Johnson, "How is she still standing?" Kane heard the comment, and his face flushed with rage. He was losing control of the situation, and worse, losing face in front of his subordinates. "You think that was impressive, Chen?" Kane's voice rose to a roar. "Let me show you what real training looks like." He grabbed her by the shoulder and dragged her toward the obstacle course. The other recruits followed at a distance, unwilling to miss what was clearly becoming a personal vendetta. The obstacle course at Camp Morrison was designed to break elite candidates. 15-foot walls, rope climbs over water hazards, crawls under razor wire. In perfect conditions, it challenged even the strongest recruits. In this downpour, with muddy equipment and zero visibility, it became nearly impossible. Kane pointed to the first obstacle, a cargo net suspended over a pit of muddy water. "Climb it," he ordered. "Fall in, and you start over. Keep falling, and you're out of my program forever." Chen approached the net without hesitation. The rope was slick with rain, the metal brackets slippery and treacherous. She began to climb. Her small size actually worked to her advantage here, requiring less grip strength to maintain her hold. Kane watched with growing frustration as she navigated the obstacle with surprising efficiency. Other recruits typically struggled with a wet rope, but Chen moved with deliberate precision. Halfway up, Kane began shaking the net violently. The sudden motion would have sent most climbers tumbling into the water below. Chen adjusted her grip and continued climbing, compensating for the deliberate interference. Her movements remained fluid, controlled. Torres approached Kane cautiously. "Sergeant, maybe we should call this session. The weather conditions are getting dangerous." Kane rounded on his subordinate with fury. "Did I ask for your opinion, Corporal? These recruits need to learn that comfort is the enemy of excellence." Chen reached the top of the net and descended the far side, completing the obstacle without incident. Kane's jaw tightened. He was running out of ways to break her, and witnesses were beginning to question his methods. Kane's desperation transformed into something darker as he led Chen to the next obstacle. The rope climb stretched 30 feet into the gray sky, ending at a platform barely visible through the rain. Most recruits needed multiple attempts in good weather. In these conditions, it bordered on suicidal. "Climb it," Kane commanded, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "All the way to the top. Ring the bell, or you're finished here." Chen looked up at the swaying rope, calculating angles and grip points with the methodical precision of someone who had done this before. Many times before. As she began her ascent, Kane grabbed a second rope and started climbing alongside her. This violated every safety protocol at Camp Morrison, but Torres was too intimidated to intervene. The other recruits watched in horror as their drill sergeant turned training into a personal duel. Kane climbed with brute force, his massive frame powering up the rope through sheer strength. Chen moved differently, using technique over power, her smaller muscles working efficiently. Halfway up, Kane deliberately swung his rope into hers, trying to knock her loose. Chen absorbed the impact without losing her grip, adjusting her position smoothly. She continued climbing while Kane grew increasingly aggressive, swinging at her repeatedly. Each impact threatened to send her plummeting to the ground 30 feet below. Private Williams turned to Martinez, his voice barely audible over the storm. "This isn't training anymore. This is attempted murder." Martinez nodded grimly, both men realizing they were witnessing something that would end careers, possibly lives. Near the top, Kane made his most violent attempt yet, launching his full body weight into Chen's rope. The impact was tremendous, designed to break her grip and sent her falling. Instead, something unexpected happened. Chen didn't just absorb the blow. She used Kane's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, she grabbed Kane's rope with her free hand and yanked hard, using precise timing and leverage. Kane, caught off balance by his own aggressive swing, lost his grip entirely. He plummeted 15 feet before crashing into the safety net below, his breath exploding from his lungs in a painful wheeze. Chun continued climbing as if nothing had happened. She reached the platform, rang the bell with calm deliberation, and began her descent. Below, Kane struggled in the net, his authority as damaged as his ego. Kane extracted himself from the safety net with all the grace of a wounded bear, his face purple with rage and humiliation. The other drill instructors exchanged worried glances as their commanding sergeant dusted himself off, his authority visibly shaken. Chun completed her descent and stood at attention, waiting for the next order. That was luck, Chun, Kane snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Let's see how lucky you are in hand-to-hand combat. Torres stepped forward immediately, recognizing the dangerous escalation. Sergeant, regulations clearly state that instructors cannot engage recruits in combat training without proper supervision and safety protocols. Kane whirled on Torres with murderous intent. Are you questioning my authority, Corporal? Torres backed down, knowing his career hung in the balance. The other recruits formed a loose circle, sensing they were about to witness something unprecedented in military training. Chin remained motionless as Kane stripped off his rain jacket, revealing arms like tree trunks covered in military tattoos. He had been a heavyweight boxer in his younger days, before the army channeled his aggression into breaking recruits. This small woman represented everything he despised about the modern military. Basic combat positions, Kane announced to the group, though his eyes never left Chun. The recruit will demonstrate proper defensive techniques, while I provide appropriate pressure. The euphemism fooled no one. This was revenge disguised as instruction. Kane lunged forward with surprising speed for his size, aiming a controlled punch toward Chen's midsection. In any normal scenario, she would block, absorb the blow, and possibly fall. Instead, Chen moved like flowing water, stepping inside Kane's reach and redirecting his momentum with minimal effort. Kane stumbled past her, his punch hitting nothing but air. The recruits murmured in surprise. Chen had made the massive sergeant look clumsy, uncoordinated. Kane spun around, his face now completely red with embarrassment and fury. Again, he commanded, but his second attack was less controlled. Chun slipped the punch easily, her movement so subtle that Kane barely saw it. She was making him look like an amateur in front of his own students, and everyone present knew it. Private Johnson whispered to Williams, "Where did she learn a move like that?" Williams shook his head, equally confused. Chun fought like someone with years of advanced training, not a fresh recruit from civilian life. Kane's third attack abandoned all pretense of training. He threw a vicious haymaker intended to knock Chun unconscious, his control completely shattered by repeated humiliation. This was assault witnessed by 24 people, and everyone knew it. Chun didn't just dodge this time. As Kane's fist whistled past her head, she stepped forward and struck 3 precise points on his extended arm. The blows looked gentle, almost casual, but Kane's entire arm went numb instantly. He staggered backward, staring at his useless limb in shock. "What did you do to me?" Kane gasped, cradling his deadened arm. Chin said nothing, but her posture had changed subtly. The submissive recruit was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. The other instructors recognized the shift, even if they couldn't explain it. Torres finally found his courage. "Sergeant Kane, I'm calling this exercise. We need medical attention for your arm." Kane spun on him with wild eyes. "Nobody calls anything until I say so." "Chin, what kind of trick was that? Some kind of martial arts nonsense?" For the first time since the ordeal began, Chin spoke. Her voice was calm, professional, completely at odds with her supposed status. "Pressure point manipulation, Sergeant. Temporary paralysis lasting approximately 15 minutes. No permanent damage unless you continue to stress the affected nerves. The clinical precision of her explanation sent chills through the assembled group. This wasn't knowledge a civilian recruit should possess. Kane's face went white as the implications sank in. He had been toying with someone far more dangerous than he realized. Private Martinez grabbed Johnson's sleeve. "Dude, who is she really?" Johnson could only shake his head, equally bewildered. Chun stood perfectly still, waiting for Kane's next move with the patience of a predator. Kane tried to attack with his good arm, but his balance was compromised by the paralyzed limb. Chun caught his wrist mid-swing and applied a joint lock that dropped the massive sergeant to his knees in seconds. The move was executed with surgical precision, causing maximum pain while avoiding permanent injury. "You're finished, Chun," Kane wheezed from his kneeling position. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're done here." Chun released the lock and stepped back, allowing Kane to struggle to his feet. Her expression remained neutral, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Actually, Sergeant," a new voice cut through the rain, "I think you're the one who's finished." Colonel Rebecca Hayes emerged from the administration building, her uniform crisp despite the driving rain. Behind her walked Lieutenant Colonel Anderson from the Inspector General's office, both officers carrying themselves with the authority that made seasoned soldiers snap to attention. Kane's face went ashen as he recognized the implications of their presence. "At ease, everyone," Hayes commanded, her voice cutting through the storm. "Except you, Sergeant Kane. You remain exactly where you are." Kane struggled to his feet, his paralyzed arm hanging uselessly at his side, mud coating his uniform like shame made visible. "Colonel, I can't explain," Kane began, but Hayes silenced him with a raised hand. "Save it, Sergeant. We've been monitoring this situation for the past 20 minutes through security cameras. What we witnessed was nothing short of criminal assault disguised as training." The recruits stood frozen, unsure whether to maintain formation or scatter. Chin remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable as the senior officers approached. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson pulled out a tablet, reviewing footage that would end Kane's career and likely put him in military prison. Torres stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, if I may, the weather conditions made normal training impossible. We should have canceled the session." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Corporal Torres, your observation is noted and appreciated. You showed proper concern for safety protocols." Kane's desperation reached new heights. "Colonel, that recruit attacked me. She used some kind of unauthorized combat techniques. She's clearly had training that wasn't disclosed during processing." Hayes turned to Chun with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. "Lieutenant Chun," Hayes said formally, causing the recruits to gasp collectively. Chun snapped to perfect attention, her military bearing now undeniable. "You have permission to explain your actions during this training exercise." Chen's voice carried quiet authority as she responded. "Ma'am, I utilized minimal force necessary to defend myself against an escalating assault. All techniques employed were non-lethal and designed to de-escalate rather than inflict permanent harm. My actions were consistent with rules of engagement for self-defense." Private Williams whispered to Martinez, "She's an officer? No wonder she never broke." Martinez stared in amazement as the pieces fell into place. Chen's composure, her physical capabilities, her clinical precision in combat, all made sense now. Kane's voice cracked with disbelief. "You're telling me this whole time she was a plant? A setup?" Anderson stepped forward with cold satisfaction. "Sergeant Kane, you've just confessed to assaulting a superior officer while under official observation." The rain continued to fall as the full scope of the operation became clear. Hayes addressed the stunned recruits directly, her voice carrying across the training ground with absolute authority. "What you witnessed today was part of an ongoing investigation into training abuse and hazing violations at Camp Morrison." Lieutenant Chun stepped forward, her entire demeanor transformed. The submissive recruit persona vanished completely, replaced by the bearing of a seasoned officer. She removed a small recording device from her uniform, water-resistant and military-grade. Every interaction, every assault, every violation of protocol had been documented. Kane stared at the device in horror. You recorded everything? Chen's response was clinical, professional. Sergeant Kane, you are being investigated for systematic abuse of recruits, violation of training protocols, and assault on a superior officer. This evidence will be presented at your court-martial. Anderson consulted his tablet, reading from an official report. Over the past 6 months, this installation has reported an unusually high dropout rate and multiple medical incidents during basic training. Lieutenant Chun volunteered to conduct an undercover investigation to determine the cause. The recruits looked at each other with dawning understanding. Private Johnson voiced what everyone was thinking. Ma'am, how many other recruits has he done this to? Hayes' expression darkened. Too many, Private. That's why we're here. Torres approached hesitantly, his relief evident. Colonel, I've tried to report concerns about Sergeant Kane's methods multiple times through proper channels. My complaints were dismissed or buried. Hayes nodded grimly. Corporal Torres, your reports were received. They form part of the initial evidence that triggered this investigation. Kane made one last desperate attempt to salvage his situation. Colonel, my methods produce results. I've turned out more elite soldiers than any instructor in this command. My success rate speaks for itself. Chun interrupted with devastating precision. Sergeant Kane, your methods have resulted in a 47% dropout rate, 12 medical injuries requiring hospitalization, and 3 attempted suicides among recruits. Your definition of success is fundamentally flawed. The statistical evidence was overwhelming, each number representing a life damaged by Kane's brutality. Williams stepped forward, emboldened by the official protection now present. Ma'am, there are other instructors who use similar methods. Kane isn't the only one. Anderson made notes on his tablet. Private Williams, we'll need your full testimony. This investigation extends beyond one individual. As military police arrived to escort Kane away, the full transformation of the situation became apparent. The recruits who had watched their tormentor humiliate what they thought was the weakest among them now realized they had witnessed justice delivered by one of the strongest. Kane's paralyzed arm served as a visible reminder of how completely the power dynamic had shifted. Chun addressed the remaining recruits directly, her voice carrying the authority she had hidden for weeks. What happened here today represents everything wrong with a training culture that confuses brutality with strength. Real warriors protect those who cannot protect themselves. They don't prey on the vulnerable. Martinez raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, what happens to us now? Will we be able to complete training? Hayes stepped forward to answer. Your training will continue under new leadership with proper oversight. Those who witness today's events will be key witnesses in reforming this program. Kane, now in custody, made one final outburst as the MPs led him away. This is what's wrong with the modern military. We're going soft, coddling recruits instead of making them strong. Chen's response cut through his rhetoric like a blade through paper. Sergeant Kane, I have completed 3 combat deployments, earned a Bronze Star for valor, and graduated first in my class from Ranger School. Your definition of strength is fear-based intimidation of people under your authority. That's not strength. That's cowardice disguised as tradition. The recruits absorbed this information with amazement. Johnson spoke up with genuine curiosity. Ma'am, why did you volunteer for this assignment? Why put yourself through what we saw today? Chun considered the question carefully before responding. Because every recruit who dropped out due to abuse, every injury caused by excessive methods, every person driven to despair by systematic brutality represents a failure of leadership. Real leaders ensure their people succeed, not that they suffer. Her words carried the weight of personal conviction born from experience. Torres stepped forward, his relief evident but mixed with professional concern. Lieutenant Chun, what changes can we expect in the training program? Anderson consulted his tablet before responding. Effective immediately, all training will be conducted under video surveillance with mandatory review protocols. Physical contact between instructors and recruits will require witness verification and medical clearance. The reforms represented a complete overhaul of the culture Kane had fostered. Williams asked the question many were thinking. "Ma'am, will other bases implement similar investigations?" Hayes nodded with satisfaction. "This operation is being replicated across 12 installations simultaneously. The era of unchecked abuse ends today." 6 months later, Camp Morrison had transformed into a model facility that other installations studied for best practices. The brutal culture Kane had fostered was replaced by demanding but fair training that built soldiers instead of breaking people. Lieutenant Colonel Chun, promoted for her exceptional service, now oversaw the new programs personally. The recruits who had witnessed Kane's downfall became some of the program's most successful graduates. Martinez earned top honors in marksmanship training, his confidence restored by instructors who build up rather than tore down. Johnson excelled in leadership development, having learned the difference between authority and intimidation. Torres, vindicated for his earlier attempts to report abuse, was promoted to Sergeant First Class and served as head instructor. His methods emphasized challenge without cruelty, pushing recruits to exceed their perceived limitations through support rather than fear. The dropout rate plummeted to historic lows, while performance standards actually increased. Williams became a peer counselor, helping new recruits navigate the demanding training while maintaining their psychological health. His experience witnessing systematic abuse made him particularly effective at identifying early warning signs and intervening before problems escalated. Chin often observed training sessions from the same observation platform where Kane had once planned his torments. But her presence inspired rather than intimidated. Recruits knew she had endured the worst the system could offer and emerged stronger, setting an example of resilience without requiring others to suffer unnecessarily. The investigation Anderson had led resulted in 17 convictions across multiple installations. Kane received a dishonorable discharge and 2 years in military prison. His case became a textbook example of how unchecked authority could corrupt training into abuse, studied by leadership courses throughout the military. During a ceremony honoring the program's success, General Morrison addressed the gathered personnel. "The strength of our military lies not in our ability to break people, but in our capacity to build them into something greater than they believe possible. Fear is the weakest foundation for discipline." Chun stood before the newest class of recruits, no longer disguised, but openly serving as their commanding officer. Her first words to them echoed across the training ground with quiet authority. "True strength protects the vulnerable, challenges the capable, and never confuses cruelty with competence." That standard begins today. The recruits responded with genuine respect rather than terrorized compliance, understanding they were in the presence of someone who had earned authority through service rather than claimed it through intimidation. The ripple effects of the Camp Morrison investigation extended far beyond one installation. Within 18 months, the entire military training doctrine underwent comprehensive reform. Chun found herself testifying before congressional committees, her experience becoming the catalyst for legislation that protected recruits while maintaining rigorous standards. During one particularly significant hearing, Senator Bradley questioned her about the psychological impact of the undercover operation. Lieutenant Colonel Chun, spending weeks enduring systematic abuse, must have taken a considerable personal toll. "How do you justify exposing yourself to such treatment?" Chin's response resonated throughout the military community. "Senator, every day I endured that abuse, I knew it was temporary and voluntary. The recruits who suffered under those conditions had no such knowledge or choice. If my sacrifice prevented even one person from being driven to despair by systematic brutality, it was worthwhile." Private Martinez, now Sergeant Martinez, and an instructor at Camp Morrison, often shared his perspective with new recruits during orientation. "I watched someone I thought was weak endure treatment that would have broken most people. When the truth was revealed, I learned that real strength often looks like vulnerability until circumstances demand otherwise." The transformation extended to instructor selection and training. Where Kane had been chosen for his intimidation factor, new instructors were evaluated for their ability to inspire growth while maintaining discipline. Torres pioneered a program that paired experienced instructors with recent graduates, ensuring accountability and fresh perspectives. Chen received numerous offers for high-profile positions, but she chose to remain focused on training reform. Her office walls displayed letters from recruits whose lives had been changed by the new culture, each one representing validation of the difficult path she had chosen. Johnson, now leading his own training unit, implemented Chen's philosophy of protective leadership. His recruits consistently exceeded performance standards while maintaining the highest morale ratings in the command. The correlation between supportive leadership and superior outcomes became undeniable. Williams established a peer support network that spread to installations worldwide. Recruits who might have suffered in silence now had advocates and resources. The suicide rate among trainees dropped to historic lows as mental health support became integrated into training rather than stigmatized. During a national military leadership conference, General Morrison presented the Camp Morrison model as the new standard. The officers in attendance, many of whom had risen through the old system, listened as paradigms shifted. Chun stood beside him, no longer hiding her capabilities, but openly demonstrating that strength and compassion were not mutually exclusive. The final validation came from an unexpected source. A former Kane associate, Sergeant Davis from a neighboring installation, approached Chun after the conference. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for methods I used before understanding their true impact. Your example showed us a better way." 5 years after that rain-soaked day at Camp Morrison, Colonel Sarah Chun stood on the same parade ground where Kane had once terrorized recruits. The transformation was complete. What had been a place of fear had become a symbol of excellence achieved through positive leadership and mutual respect. The newest class of recruits assembled before her, their faces reflecting confidence rather than terror. Among them stood Private Rebecca Foster, a young woman whose small stature reminded Chun of herself during the undercover operation. But Foster would never face the abuse Chun had endured, protected by reforms written in the lessons of that difficult experience. Torres, now the installation's command sergeant major, approached with the morning's training report. "Ma'am, graduation rates are at 92% with performance scores exceeding all previous benchmarks." The correlation between supportive training and superior outcomes had become indisputable across the entire military. During the ceremony recognizing outstanding recruits, Chen reflected on the cost and value of her sacrifice. Every letter from a grateful graduate, every success story from reformed instructors, every life saved from despair validated the weeks of abuse she had endured. The temporary suffering had prevented immeasurable long-term damage. Martinez, now a captain and head of instructor development, presented awards to his training staff. His own journey from witness to leader embodied the transformation Chun had fought to achieve. Johnson, commanding his own installation, implemented her principles across an entire base. Williams, whose peer support program had spread throughout the military, often cited that rainy day as the moment he understood the difference between strength and brutality. His networks had prevented countless tragedies by providing support before desperation took hold. In the audience, parents watched their children graduate with pride instead of concern. The reputation of military training had evolved from surviving brutality to excelling through challenge. Chen's sacrifice had restored public trust in an institution that shaped the nation's defenders. As the ceremony concluded, a young instructor approached Chen nervously. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you personally. My sister attended training under the old system and nearly didn't survive the experience. Because of your courage, my recruits will never face that choice between their dreams and their well-being." Chen's response reflected the wisdom earned through her ordeal. The strongest people are often those who appear most vulnerable, until circumstances reveal their true nature. Never underestimate someone because they seem different from what you expect strength to look like. The sun broke through the clouds as the new graduates dispersed to begin their military careers, confident in their abilities and protected by reforms purchased with one person's willingness to endure temporary suffering for permanent change. Sometimes the greatest victories look like defeats until their true impact becomes clear.